In 1924, archaeologists found something that could have changed everything we know about ancient history, but they buried it in a basement and forgot about it for a century. Why? Because it didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. Look, I'm not here to tell you that mainstream history is all lies or whatever, but there's something really weird that happens when scientists find stuff that messes with the timeline we've all been taught. And this story? It's one of the strangest ones I've come across. So let me take you back to the early 1920s. World War I just ended, archaeology is having this golden age, and everyone's obsessed with digging up ancient civilizations. Egypt, Mesopotamia, all those places. Teams of archaeologists are racing to find the next big thing that'll make them famous. And then, in a random excavation site in Turkey, a team stumbles onto something absolutely bizarre. We're talking about a series of underground chambers that shouldn't exist based on what we know about that time period. The tools they found inside these chambers were way too advanced for the era they were supposed to be from. And the writing on the walls, it didn't match any known language from that region. Now here's where it gets interesting. The lead archaeologist on this dig was a guy named Wilhelm Dörpfeld. You probably haven't heard of him, but back then, he was a big deal. He had worked with Heinrich Schliemann, the guy who found Troy. Dörpfeld had credentials, he had respect, and he had a reputation to protect. When his team brought up what they found, Dörpfeld got excited at first. He started documenting everything, taking photographs, making detailed notes. He thought this was going to be his legacy, the discovery that would put his name in every history book. But then something changed. The academic community started pushing back. Hard. See, the problem was timing. Based on the depth of the site and the surrounding geological layers, these chambers appeared to be from around 10,000 BCE. That's before the supposed invention of agriculture, before permanent settlements, before basically everything we consider the start of civilization. And the tools they found. They showed signs of metallurgy techniques that weren't supposed to exist for another 6,000 years. We're talking about precise drilling methods, evidence of alloy mixing, stuff that required knowledge of chemistry and engineering. The writing was another issue entirely. It wasn't cuneiform, it wasn't hieroglyphics, it wasn't anything anyone had seen before. And trust me, by 1924, archaeologists had seen a lot. They'd decoded ancient languages, they'd traced the evolution of writing systems, they had a pretty solid understanding of how human communication developed. This didn't fit anywhere. So what did the academic establishment do? They attacked Dörpfeld. Not physically, but they went after his credibility. Papers were published questioning his methods. People suggested he'd made mistakes in his dating techniques. Some even hinted that he might have planted evidence or gotten confused about which layer of soil things came from. Now here's the thing. Dörpfeld wasn't some amateur. He'd spent decades excavating sites. He knew what he was doing. But when you challenge the accepted narrative of human history, the people who built their careers on that narrative don't like it very much. Within a year, Dörpfeld stopped talking about the discovery. He moved on to other projects. And all those artifacts, all those photographs, all those detailed notes, they got packed into crates and shipped off to a museum basement in Berlin. And that's where they sat, for decades. The really crazy part is that Dörpfeld wasn't the only one. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, there were scattered reports from other archaeologists who found similar anomalies, advanced tools in primitive sites, writing systems that appeared too early, evidence of knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet. And almost every single one of these discoveries got the same treatment. Dismissed, explained away, or just quietly forgotten. I'm not saying there's some massive conspiracy to hide the truth about ancient history, but I am saying that there's a pattern here. When evidence doesn't fit the established timeline, it gets ignored, and sometimes it gets actively suppressed. Fast forward to 2024, 100 years after Dörpfeld's discovery. A graduate student in Berlin was doing research for her thesis on early 20th century archaeological methods. She was going through old museum archives, looking at forgotten expeditions, trying to understand how archaeologists worked back then. And she found the crates. They were labeled with Dörpfeld's name and the location in Turkey, but there was no record of what was inside, no catalog entry, nothing in the museum's database. These crates had literally been forgotten. When she opened them, she found everything. The tools, the photographs, the notes, all preserved, all still in good condition. And she realized she was looking at something significant. She brought it to her professor. Her professor brought it to the museum director. And slowly people started taking another look at what Dörpfeld had found a century earlier. The thing is, we have better technology now. Carbon dating is more accurate. We have genetic analysis, we have satellite imaging, we have all these tools that didn't exist in 1924. So researchers decided to actually test these artifacts properly. And that's when things got really interesting. The initial carbon dating on the organic materials found in the chambers confirmed Dörpfeld's original assessment. These sites were old, really old. We're talking about a time period when humans were supposed to be living in small nomadic groups, hunting and gathering, maybe starting to experiment with basic agriculture. They weren't supposed to be building underground complexes. They weren't supposed to be working with metal alloys. They weren't supposed to be writing in complex symbolic systems, but the evidence said they were. The metallurgy analysis was even more surprising. The tools showed signs of techniques that required a deep understanding of material properties. They found evidence of controlled heating and cooling, of mixing different metals to achieve specific properties, of treating surfaces to make them more durable. This wasn't someone accidentally discovering that hitting copper makes it harder. This was systematic, intentional, sophisticated metalworking. And then there was the writing. Linguists spent months analyzing the symbols. They used computer programs to look for patterns. They compared it to every known ancient language. They tried everything, and they found something weird. The writing system showed characteristics of being fully developed. Most ancient writing systems we found show clear signs of evolution. You can see how they started simple and got more complex over time. But this looked like it appeared fully formed. It's like finding a printed book from a time when people were supposed to be scratching pictures on cave walls. So why did historians ignore this for 100 years? Well, that's the question everyone's asking now. Some people say it's because admitting these discoveries were real would mean rewriting major parts of human history. And that's expensive, it's complicated, and it makes a lot of established scholars look bad. Others think it's simpler than that. They say it's just human nature. When something doesn't fit what you already believe, it's easier to dismiss it than to reconsider everything you thought you knew. There's also a practical element. If you're an archaeologist in the 1920s and you report finding something impossible, your career is over. Your funding dries up. Your papers don't get published. Other archaeologists stop taking you seriously. So maybe Dörpfeld and others like him made a choice. Maybe they decided their careers were more valuable than fighting an impossible battle against the entire academic establishment. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because once news got out about what was found in those Berlin crates, other researchers started coming forward. And it turns out, there were more discoveries like this. Way more. In the 1930s, a French team found similar underground structures in Syria. The artifacts got scattered during World War II, and most people assumed they were lost. But recently, some of them turned up in a private collection. And when researchers examined them, they matched what Dörpfeld found in Turkey. In the 1950s, Soviet archaeologists reported finding advanced tools in Kazakhstan that dated to impossibly early time periods. The Cold War meant Western scholars never took those reports seriously. But the documentation still exists in Russian archives. And now people are taking a second look. In the 1970s, a team in Peru found evidence of metallurgy that predated known metalworking in South America by thousands of years. The lead archaeologist published one paper about it, got absolutely destroyed by peer review, and never mentioned it again. All of these discoveries got buried, sometimes literally. And for decades, anyone who tried to talk about them got labeled as a fringe theorist or a pseudoscientist. But now, with new technology and new evidence, the conversation is changing. Major universities are starting to take these anomalies seriously. Academic journals are publishing papers that question the established timeline. Conferences are being held to discuss what all of this might mean. And the implications are huge. If humans had advanced knowledge and technology thousands of years earlier than we thought, that changes everything. It changes how we understand the development of civilization. It changes our theories about human migration and cultural exchange. It changes the entire story of who we are and where we came from. Some researchers are suggesting that human development wasn't linear like we've always assumed. Maybe it was cyclical. Maybe civilizations rose and fell multiple times before the ones we know about. Maybe knowledge was lost and rediscovered over and over again. Others think there might have been more cultural exchange between ancient peoples than we realized. Maybe techniques and knowledge spread across vast distances much earlier than we thought possible. And then there are the more controversial theories. Some people think this is evidence of a lost civilization that predated everything we know. A society that had advanced knowledge but was wiped out by some catastrophe, leaving only scattered remnants behind. I'm not here to tell you which theory is correct. Honestly, I don't think anyone knows yet. The research is still ongoing, the debates are still happening, and new evidence is still being analyzed. But what I can tell you is this. The fact that these discoveries were ignored for so long tells us something important about how science and history work. It's not always about following the evidence wherever it leads. Sometimes it's about protecting established ideas. Sometimes it's about politics and careers and reputations. And that should concern us. Because if we're ignoring evidence that doesn't fit our current understanding, what else might we be missing? What other discoveries are sitting in museum basements, forgotten and uncatalogued? What other archaeologists decided their careers were more important than reporting what they actually found? The thing about history is that we treat it like it's settled, like we know what happened and when it happened and how it all fits together. But the truth is, history is constantly being revised. New discoveries change our understanding all the time. The difference is most of those changes are small. They adjust dates by a few decades. They clarify details about known civilizations. They fill in gaps in the story we already accept. But sometimes new discoveries don't fit the existing story at all. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can ignore the evidence and protect what we think we know. Or we can be brave enough to admit that maybe we got some things wrong. For 100 years, the academic establishment chose to ignore evidence that didn't fit. They chose to protect the established narrative instead of investigating anomalies. They chose comfort over curiosity. But now, that's changing. The discoveries that were buried in basements are coming back to light. The researchers who were dismissed are being vindicated, and the questions that were considered too dangerous to ask are finally being taken seriously. What does this mean for our understanding of human history? Honestly, it's too early to say. The research is just getting started. Scientists are still analyzing the evidence, still debating the interpretations, still trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together. But one thing's for sure, the story we've been told about human development, about the rise of civilization, about when and how our ancestors gained advanced knowledge, that story is incomplete, and maybe in some important ways, it's wrong. The discovery that Dörpfeld made in 1924 wasn't just about some old tools and mysterious writing. It was about a time period when humans were supposed to be primitive, when we were supposed to be just figuring out the basics of survival. But what if we weren't? What if there's a whole chapter of human history that we've missed? What if our ancestors were more capable, more advanced, more sophisticated than we ever gave them credit for? These aren't just academic questions. They touch on something fundamental about how we see ourselves as a species, about our potential, our history, our place in the world. And the fact that evidence of this was sitting in a basement for 100 years, ignored and forgotten, that should make us wonder what else we might be missing. What other inconvenient truths are being overlooked because they don't fit the story we want to tell? I started by saying that historians ignored this discovery for 100 years. But that's not quite accurate. It's not that they didn't know about it. They did. They actively chose to bury it. They made a decision that protecting the established narrative was more important than investigating an anomaly. And that's the real story here. Not just what was found in Turkey in 1924, but what the response to that discovery tells us about how knowledge is controlled, how narratives are maintained, and how evidence that challenges accepted beliefs gets treated. The good news is, the truth has a way of coming out eventually. It took a century, but those crates were opened, the evidence was examined, and now, finally, the questions that should have been asked in 1924 are being asked today. We don't know where this research will lead. We don't know how much of our understanding of ancient history will need to be revised. But we're finally asking the right questions. We're finally looking at the evidence with open minds instead of trying to force it into a predetermined narrative. And maybe that's the most important lesson here. Science and history should be about following evidence, not protecting beliefs. When we find something that doesn't fit, that should be exciting, not threatening. That should be an opportunity to learn something new, not a reason to hide what we found. Dörpfeld discovered something extraordinary 100 years ago. It got buried, forgotten, ignored. But now, finally, his discovery is getting the attention it deserves. And who knows? Maybe it'll lead us to completely reimagine human history. Maybe it'll change everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. Or maybe it'll just be a fascinating footnote, an interesting anomaly that doesn't quite fit anywhere. Either way, it deserves to be investigated properly. It deserves to be taken seriously. Because that's how we actually learn. That's how we actually advance our understanding. Not by protecting what we think we know, but by being brave enough to question it. If this got you thinking about what else might be hidden in history, there's another video you should check out next.